90.5%. That is the share of voters in Unterberg, Canton Schwyz, who voted yes on June 14, 2026, to cap Switzerland's population at 10 million. Population density, 53 people per square kilometer. Voter turnout, 78%. 48 kilometers away, in the city of Bern, 83.6% voted no. Same ballot, same question, 74 points apart. The world read this result as a rejection. A prosperous, stable democracy had voted down a populist initiative. The headline wrote itself. The data says something different. 45.2% of Switzerland voted yes to terminate the free movement of persons with the European Union. Not a fringe position, not a protest vote from a single canton. Nearly half the country, across language regions, across income brackets, in a binding federal referendum. And in rural municipalities, defined as fewer than 200 residents per square kilometer, the initiative passed, not narrowly, with a majority. The vote that failed at the national level won in the places where most of Switzerland's land sits and most of its food grows. The no vote was not a confidence vote for Europe. It was a vote against a poorly designed instrument for a problem that the majority of Swiss voters already consider real. But how did Switzerland get here? That answer starts in 1992, December 6, 1992. Switzerland votes on membership in the European Economic Area, a structure that would have given it single market access without EU membership. The result, 50.3% no, the narrowest rejection in Swiss post-war history. Three structural forces drove the number. First, fear of legal transfer. EEA membership required automatic adoption of EU law with no Swiss vote. Second, the sovereignty argument. Every new rule from Brussels would bind Switzerland without Swiss representation in Brussels. Third, political mobilization. Christoph Blocher and the SVP turned a technocratic trade question into a national identity referendum, and they won. The federal government responded with what became known as the bilateral track, not membership, not the EEA. 7 sector-specific agreements, negotiated individually, giving Switzerland access to EU markets on a case-by-case basis, land transport, air traffic, research, agriculture, public procurement, technical barriers, and free movement of persons. The first package, Bilaterals I, came into force in 2002. The second package, Bilaterals II, in 2004. Each agreement came with a guillotine clause. If Switzerland terminated one, the others fell. For a while, it held, but the architecture had a structural problem built into its foundation. February 9, 2014. Switzerland votes again, this time on the Mass Immigration Initiative, a proposal to reintroduce annual immigration quotas. The result, 50.3% yes. The European Commission's response was immediate. Quotas are structurally incompatible with free movement of persons, and free movement of persons is structurally coupled to every other bilateral agreement. The entire architecture was now under stress. What followed was 3 years of diplomatic tension. Switzerland attempted to implement the initiative. It passed a domestic law, but the EU held. Faced with the guillotine, Switzerland enacted a watered-down version, a domestic job preference obligation, that satisfied neither side and left the core contradiction untouched. The system worked only as long as both parties agreed to treat ambiguity as stability. But if the bilateral system was already under this much pressure in 2014, why did Switzerland not build an alternative? That answer is in the numbers, and those numbers are more uncomfortable than they appear. In 2008, the United Arab Emirates identified the Strait of Hormuz as a structural risk. Roughly 21% of global oil supply transits that strait. The UAE could not control it, so they did not try to negotiate it. They routed around it. The Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, 380 kilometers. Construction began 2008, online 2012. Total capacity, 1.5 million barrels per day. Cost, approximately $3.3 billion. In 2026, the UAE left OPEC. The decision was not made in 2026. It was made possible in 2008, when the infrastructure that would allow independent export became a funded project on a drawing board. 19 years of preparation, one decision, one direction, now run the same timeline through Switzerland. 1992. Switzerland identifies the European dependency as a structural risk. It rejects the EEA. The alternative? Bilateral agreements. 7 contracts that secured access by embedding Switzerland deeper into the system it had just voted to stay outside. Every agreement that opened a market locked in a dependency. Every locked-in dependency made the next negotiation harder to exit. The bilaterals were not a transition architecture. They were the dependency itself, rewritten in contract form. The UAE recognized a structural risk in 2008 and built around it. Switzerland recognized the same class of risk in 1992 and negotiated into it. One built a pipeline, one extended the lease 7 times. That is not the same as joining OPEC. It is the same as staying in OPEC and increasing the production quota. And then there is one number that changes everything, 27.3%. We will get to what that means. But first, what the bilateral architecture actually produced. So far, this is a story about a handshake that held for 30 years. But what happened on June 14th revealed that the handshake was covering a fracture, and that fracture is the part that matters. 27.3%. That is the share of foreign nationals in Switzerland's permanent resident population as of end 2025, the highest in Swiss post-war history, according to the Federal Statistical Office. 1 in every 4 people living permanently in Switzerland is not a Swiss citizen. In isolation, that number is a demographic fact. In context, it is a distribution problem wearing the costume of a values debate. The 45.2% who voted yes on June 14th are not distributed randomly. They live predominantly in municipalities with fewer than 200 residents per square kilometer. They do not consume skilled labor from the EU the way urban employers do. They do not benefit from free movement as buyers in a tight services market. What they carry: primary schools where majority of students are non-German speaking. Regional hospitals running at structural overcapacity. A housing market in commuter zones where median rents have risen 23% in 10 years. These are not perceptions. These are municipal budget lines. The 54.8% who voted no live predominantly in urban centers that directly benefit from skilled labor import: Zurich, Basel, Geneva, Bern. Their employers fill 37% of all new positions with workers from EU member states. Their tech sector, their hospitals, their universities all carry structural dependencies on free movement that are not political preferences. They are operational realities. This is not a conflict of values. It is a distribution asymmetry that is being conducted as an identity argument. The costs land in one geography, the benefits land in another. The ballot box does not correct for geography. And to understand what that means, compare it to Denmark. Same pressure, same timeline, completely different outcome. In June 1992, the same year Switzerland voted no to the EEA, Denmark voted no to the Maastricht Treaty. The Danish government went back to Brussels. It negotiated 4 opt-outs from the treaty: the Euro, defense cooperation, EU citizenship, and justice and home affairs. Denmark then held a second referendum in 1993. Result: 56.7% yes. Denmark built an inside position with negotiated exceptions. Switzerland built an outside position with no exceptions, and then spent 30 years adding exceptions through bilateral contracts, each one tightening the bind. Denmark said, "We are members, but not in these 4 rooms." Switzerland said, "We are not members, but we need access to all the rooms." The difference in leverage is structural, not rhetorical. 3 structural problems are active in Switzerland in 2026. None of them are temporary. First, the NZZ-KMU barometer. 2026 published June 3rd records the lowest SME confidence index since the survey began in 2021, negative 7.3 index points. Less than one-third of Swiss small and medium enterprises can adapt their business model within 6 months. The drivers: geopolitical uncertainty, U.S. trade policy, and regulatory load. The OECD minimum tax, 15% on large corporations operating in Switzerland, is now embedded in federal law after the 2023 referendum. For SMEs not subject to the minimum tax, the administrative overhang remains. Second, the Neutrality initiative goes to a referendum on September 27, 2026. Current polling, SRG/Watson, June 21, 2026, shows 54% no, 34% yes. But the SVP enters this campaign having just demonstrated that 45% of the Swiss electorate will follow it to the end on a migration-adjacent question. 34% yes is not a rejection, it is a floor. Third, bilaterals. 3. Signed March 2, 2026. Federal Council dispatch to Parliament, March 13, 2026. Parliamentary debate, currently running. Earliest possible referendum, 2027. EU. Parliament consent, expected autumn 2026. Entry into force, not before 2028. Until ratification is complete, Switzerland remains a partial participant in Horizon Europe. Swiss research institutions cannot lead EU research consortia. They cannot apply as coordinators. The Swiss government has covered the gap domestically since 2022, but full association status is contingent on Bilateral III clearing every ratification step. The echo of 1992 is structural. Switzerland has still not built its equivalent of the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline. An alternative architecture, one that would reduce the binary of deep integration versus formal isolation, would have needed to begin in 2026 to be operationally viable by 2040. There is no such project. 90.5%. Switzerland's problem is not immigration, it is architecture.